And another Banksy artwork has appeared in London. There are fears it may have been stolen. The silhouette of a wolf howling on a satellite dish was seen on a rooftop in Peckham in southeast London. Police say officers, though, were called to reports of a satellite dish being stolen on Rye Lane this afternoon. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 21 points at 81.44. The pound buys $1.27 and €1.16. LBC weather: showers continuing in the north and the west tonight. Clear for most by dawn. The odd shower in the southeast and a low of 10 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Simon Marks.
Now, as we head towards the end of what has absolutely been another tumultuous week across England, we are going to spend the next hour looking at the role of the police, dealing with the protests and the riots that have been taking place. And we're going to be taking your questions about the police and policing. I'm delighted to say that in the studio with me all the way through until 9 o'clock, ready to take your questions, are Tiffany Lynch, who is the acting national chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. She is a serving officer in the Leicestershire Force. And Brian Booth, essentially Tiffany's deputy, the acting deputy national chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales. And he is a serving officer in West Yorkshire and previously served in Lancashire. At a time when there has been such debate and discussion about policing and about the extraordinary challenges that forces up and down the land have faced dealing with these highly decentralised protests, learning about them maybe just an hour or two before they actually occur by scouring social media accounts, suddenly having to race officers to one part of a city and then discovering that protests are taking place in a different area. These have been extremely challenging times for the police, and of course there has been considerable discussion nationally about what is referred to as two-tier policing. Not everybody uses that phrase in the same way. Not everyone always agrees about the definition of two-tier policing. Earlier this week, the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage was in this studio talking exclusively to my colleague Tom Swarbrick, and he explained why he believes there are concerns about so-called two-tier policing.
What we know are the police forces in this country are terrified of being accused of being racist and therefore police things differently. And stop and search is a classic example of where we've downplayed stop and search in areas with higher black proportions of the community. By the way, despite the fact the majority of those that die of knife crime are black people themselves.
But the operationalising of police decisions is something that the police have to answer for. They need to be accountable for those decisions. Yes. But it's not two tiers based on the colour of someone's skin or the favouritism the police might show one type of community, is it? We agree that.
No, we don't agree.
Right.
I think we use a softer approach on some groups than others.
And your example for that is?
Well, I think Black Lives Matter, the way that was policed, is very interesting. I mean, people tearing down statues and chucking them in the dock with police just standing by and watching. We even saw Winston Churchill's statue being defaced. We saw the cenotaph being abused. All of those things happened with the police literally just watching. And I tell you something. Out there in the country, there is a widespread perception that we have two-tier policing.
This morning, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, spoke to LBC about the issue. He says he does understand some of the concerns about police treating all communities with equal fairness, but he is concerned by seeing politicians like Nigel Farage trying to interfere with police operations.
I'm somebody who, ensured that Damien Lewis Casey did a report into their police service because of concerns by the black community, by women, and by those from the LGBTQ plus community about, two-tier policing. So of course I understand the concerns people have about the way our police operate. What's really important though is that the police have operational independence, that somebody like me who's a politician can't tell them who to arrest, who to charge, can't tell them how to police a protest, because just think about the consequences if I could. What's next? Me telling judges the sentence they give to people in the dock. And so it's really important that, yes, of course, we have the checks and balances of the police, we hold them to account, but also recognise that, the Commissioner and his team will police an operation based upon their intelligence, their expertise, and how they think best to keep our city safe.
So if you have questions about this issue of two-tier policing or about anything else relating to policing in England and Wales, our two guests here are ready to take your questions and calls. Tiffany Lynch, the Acting National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales, and Brian Booth, the Acting Deputy National Chair. They're ready for your calls at 0345 6060 973 and for your questions via text at 84850. Welcome to you both. Huge thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Tiffany Lynch, can I ask you first of all, as we've been promoting this hour through the week, I keep saying that the Police Federation is effectively the closest thing that the police have to a trade union. Can you introduce it in more detail? What are the tasks, responsibilities and the size of the membership that the Police Federation of England and Wales represents?
Good evening, and that's a great question to start with, because there is a lack of knowledge as to the representation of our police officers up and down the country. So the Police Federation is a staff association. We're not a trade union. And the one main factor of that is that the police officers cannot strike. We represent 145,000 police officers in England and Wales. And that's from the rank of police constable up to chief inspector.
And in terms of what you have had to deal with, what your members have had to deal with since the murderous events in Southport on Monday a week ago, what are your members saying to you about the stress and pressure that they have come under, not just in terms of responding to all of these protests as they have cropped up, as I was saying, in this sort of highly decentralised fashion, but also about there must be an exhaustion factor that sets in, especially at this time of year when presumably, like everybody else, your members want to go on holiday.
Absolutely. And before we get into that detail, I want to put on record and state that for every single police officer, our thoughts are with Alice, BB and Elsie's family, for the injured youngsters and their families and anybody else who was involved in that incident. It was horrific. And our police officers were there at the scene dealing with that and then subsequently having to deal with the disorder that followed. What we've seen is in this last week is policing at its best. We've had criminality, thuggery, where our police officers have been faced against violence from everything from sticks, stones, bricks and street furniture thrown at them. And you're quite right. There's only so far that we can actually reach out to the policing service in getting those highly trained, equipped officers out there. They're already having rest days cancelled, annual leave cancelled. We haven't got that infinite number. And that's not forgetting the police officers that are having to backfill for those officers that are being put on the front line at this time. We have police staff who are working extended hours to gather the intelligence and get everything ready so that we can actually get these prosecutions to court. So it's incredibly hard right now, but they're doing an immense job. And we're really proud of them.
And Brian Booth, and thanks to you as well, Brian, for being here tonight. We had a conversation on Monday on the programme about whether the institutions of the country, the police, the courts, the jails, were capable of dealing with a crisis of this scale. Are the police, given their current recruitment numbers, given the stresses and strains that are already on forces up and down England and also in Wales, are they sufficiently resourced to guarantee members of the public that they can deal with this without extraordinary measures having been taken? We've had several callers during the week who have suggested the army should have been put on the streets. Have the police got enough men and women and enough gear and enough resource to deal with what the country's been facing?
It's a really good question, Simon. And like Tiff said, members have really stepped up to the plate. They've shown amazing bravery. Like Tiff has already said, they've had their annual leave cancelled. We have got resourcing available because our colleagues, when they finish that long shift, they might be starting very early in the morning. They jump in a van, and we know certainly from over the weekend, officers from the Midlands were deployed to violence in the Midlands, then up to Newcastle and back, and doing between 18 and 20-hour shifts. They go home for a very short period, they come back, stick on the uniform, and they go and do it again. And that's what what Tiff's saying here, they're absolutely showing brilliant resilience, and we couldn't be more proud in the Federation of these officers.
And can I ask you about a question that occurred to me the other day? The closing of police stations. I mean, the number of police stations here in London, I forget the number, but it's dwindled by a stunning number, and I presume that is a pattern that exists nationally. Is that problematic, or has organisation simply been changed to reflect the reality of not having the individual neighbourhood NICs that used to exist?
Do you know something? It's another excellent question, because there's been an absolute lack of investment in policing over the last decade. Now, we have had, obviously, the 20,000 officer uplift, but this has come at a cost, because we have lost a lot of experience. We have a lot of newer officers, younger in-service officers coming into the service, and that created training issues for us. And we did highlight this to the government over the last decade, but we were kind of put back in his box a little. If you remember Theresa May, we were decimated. And over that last 10 years, the population size of the UK has changed, and policing's changed. Demand has become more, and the complexities of dealing with certain cases have become more complex. So when you look at investigations into computer crimes, this is taking officers from the street. We also have the extra burden of the Data Protection Act. And one of our primary campaigns is the DG6 campaign, where we're trying to get a change in the legislation of the Data Protection Act, which reduces the bureaucratic burden on officers and gets them from reviewing case files and building evidence back onto the streets.
And on that issue of the number of police stations, the Liberal Democrats in January released figures claiming that around a fifth of the police stations that were open in 2015 had been closed down by last year. Let me ask you both to put your headphones on, because we're going to go to our first caller of the night, who has called us up at 0345 6060 973. It is Michael in Hackney. Michael, good evening. What is your question for Tiffany Lynch and or Brian Booth?
Yeah, hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Michael. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. Yeah, so first I want to, thank the police, obviously, for the service that they've been doing. They've had a tough week on the last week, and we've seen how effective the police can be, and the judicial system can be when they really act in that type of manner. My question is that we've had about 10 months of pro-Palestinian. It's been mainly, I wouldn't call them all riots, but most of them have been peaceful protests, but we've had a lot of them that haven't been. And a lot of communities were feeling very intimidated by these. And I think if the police would have acted against some of the instigators, the bad boys, in the same type of way that we saw today, that would have sent a strong message, and we would have had a lot more peaceful protests over the last couple of months.
So, Michael...
My main question is, how come we didn't see the same type of approach and the same quick sentencing that we saw, which we saw over the last week? And I think a lot of the communities that have this week felt a lot of fear can now understand what some other communities have been feeling over the last 10 months.
OK, Michael,
so
let's put that question to Tiffany Lynch,
yeah,
from the acting chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales.
Good evening, Michael, and thank you for your thanks in terms of the service that's being conducted by our men and women over this last week. I think we're moving on to the two-tier policing reflection. And what I will say is that society is forever evolving, and so is the police service. When it comes to the two-tier policing, we police by consent and without fear or favour. So when you're seeing the police officers out there on the streets, we're utilising the intelligence, we're utilising the threat, harm and risk assessment and the elements of those particular operations. And it's continual assessment. So we will have the gold command in the control rooms or in the main station. And they will be assessing that at all stages. And it's all about escalation rather than descaling. So if we go in hard right at the very start, it actually can cause us a lot more problems than starting off with police officers in street uniform. And then obviously as that assessment and that threat escalates, then we then have the mobilisation that you've seen this week.
But what about this notion that people have been brought to court and in some cases jailed much more rapidly with relation to these protests than with relation to some of the pro-Palestinian marches that have taken place?
Yeah, well, I think what we've seen on the screens, on the TV screens and heard on the radio, the level of violence that is actually being used against the police service and police officers that are out there, and also innocent members of the community.
OK, more of your calls and questions to Tiffany Lynch and Brian Booth of the Police Federation of England and Wales, 0345 6060 973. Texts as well to 84850. The time now is 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Simon Marks on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
And if you call that number, you can put your questions now to Tiffany Lynch and Brian Booth of the Police Federation. That is exactly what David in Macclesfield has done. David, what's your question?
Oh, yes. My question is sort of starts with a statement. By kowtowing to the perpetrators, the police are exacerbating the problem and creating a further divide within the population.
David, what do you mean kowtowing to the perpetrators?
What it means is that there are some unequal balances of how can I put it? Look, I see people who are treated unfairly and others who are treated fairly, and the whole thing is off scale. It's not balanced. It's not equal. I mean, there are people going about with machetes and swords and guns and everything else, and they're not locked up. Why is that?
Tiffany Lynch, Brian Booth.
I'll take that one. Hello, David. Every policing incident has intelligence. It's led on reporting and whether police resourcing is available, and it's very difficult because I don't know which particular incident you're talking about. But I can tell you now, my colleagues see someone running around with a machete or a firearm, they will deal with them very robustly. OK, Scott is in West Hampstead. Scott, what would you like to ask Tiffany Lynch and Brian Booth?
Hi, Simon. We're going to miss you when you go back to this stage.
Well, you'll still be hearing me. You'll just be hearing me in a different format, Scott.
Thank you. My question to, Tiffany. Hello, Tiffany and Brian. I hope the police officers who have been injured make a speedy recovery. It's absolutely horrendous, this spree of violence. But my question is, will the attacks on the police that we've seen over the last week affect recruitment and retention? Is there any evidence that attacks like this do affect recruitment and retention?
That is a great question. Who'd like to take that one?
I'm happy to take that one. And thank you very much for passing on your well wishes to our injured colleagues.
You're welcome.
It's very, very good of you.
I had two brothers in the police. They're both retired, but I had to, and they'd be visibly shaken to know what's going on down here in England and Wales. One's in America and one's in Scotland.
So, Tiffany, what's the impact of events like the ones we've witnessed over the last 8 or 9 days on recruitment?
It's going to affect recruitment potentially and also retention. We've got a very young workforce now, where a lot of these officers that are out there on the front line will never have experienced that level of violence before. If we cast it back to the 2011 riots down here in London, a lot of our workforce now would have still been in school. So we have to obviously care for the physical injuries of our officers, but there's also going to be a lot of mental well-being after this incident as well. So in terms of the recruitment, I think a lot of people will see the true reality of what policing can be. Not all the time, but let's not forget also that we have on average 140 assaults on police officers every single week. Every single day you've got officers that are being assaulted. In this particular incident alone this last week, 191 assaults on officers, 100 injured officers and over 60 hospitalised.
Amazing numbers. Caroline has sent a text message saying the police have done incredible work this week. Can't imagine the challenges they've had to face. Gary has sent a WhatsApp message saying, I think the police are underpaid, under-resourced and underappreciated. They run towards danger, not away from it. They're used as a political football all the time. We have by far the best police force in the world. Chris has texted in to say, with respect, they are policing with favour and with fear. They ran away in one recent conflict and were nowhere to be seen in another. Now, I don't know precisely which incidents Chris is referring to there, Brian, but there certainly have been moments during the last week where we've seen video images from various towns and cities across the country, and you've seen two groups facing off against one another and a pretty thin blue line of police separating them. And I think in Rotherham, certainly there was that moment when it appeared that the police were in retreat. What explains that?
Firstly, can I just thank Gary, because he should be sat where I am. What an absolutely excellent comment. Well said, Gary. Chris, I'm a West Yorkshire officer, and we saw some of these perhaps incidents you're talking about happening in Hare Hills when there was some disorder a few weeks ago. And all I can say is every policing incident's quite different. So those officers could have attended as a part of a normal response vehicle to attend to a dispute that's happening in the street. When that dispute escalates and they start taking bricks, bottles, sticks and other missiles, they are not in the correct equipment to keep them safe. And if I was their sergeant, I'd be saying, retreat, let's go get us proper kit on and come back. And that's sometimes what you see on the videos. So without me trying to say police officers never retreat, yes they do, but for tactical reasons. And now if we go to the Rotherham incident, you know, what you have sometimes is the helicopter above gathering intelligence, and it may be those officers are in a position where they're going to be flanked or attacked from the rear by another group. They have to tactically move that unit to a different position. So from an outsider's point of view, tactically it looks like retreat, but it isn't. It's absolutely using the tactics correctly, how they've been trained.
Tiffany, we've got a question from Joseph who's WhatsApped it in to us. Does the Police Federation keep count of the religious beliefs of their members? I presume he means the religious faith of their members. And if so, what percentage of the Police Federation are Islamic?
It's a good question, Joseph. And yes, we do. So within the Police Federation, we obviously cover a number of areas of work. And one of those areas is to do with race and belief. Race, religion and belief, I'm sorry. In terms of the percentages, I don't have those figures to hand, but I can obviously get them and we can give them to you in the studio and you can get them to Joseph, I'm sure. It's something that is very, very important in terms of the police service, because we have black, white, Asian officers, and we have to support each other in the same way.
I heard a caller on another programme on LBC earlier in the week suggesting that in terms of recruiting, the police now are only seeking diversity, equity and inclusivity hires. That's not accurate, is it?
No, it's not accurate at all.
And but what role does DEI, diversity, equity and inclusivity, play in terms of recruitment?
A very important role, because we represent society. We cannot have a fully white police service. We cannot have one particular race or religion service. So it plays very, very heavily in the recruitment. Of course it does. But it also within the retention.
Let's get back to the phone lines. Ranjit has called in from Oldbury in the West Midlands. Ranjit, good evening to you.
Good evening. Thank you for taking my call. Hi to the two guests here. My questions is two questions. One is, by abolishing the height restrictions, I know it went on a few years ago, has it made the police force look weak? And the other one is, by hiring graduates and giving them fast-track promotion, is that the best way to get the management team together?
Both excellent questions. Who wants to take the height question?
I'll take the height question because so I am. Good evening, Ranjit. I am 5'8", so I'm probably a little higher than average for a female. But what I will also say is, when I first joined on shift, I was one of only one female officer, and I have to say that for my male counterparts, they would, in any violent situation or anything like that, they would throw me into it, irrespective of being female or how tall or short I was. And bearing in mind, a lot of my shift were over 6 foot tall.
And what are the height restrictions now?
There is no height.
There is no height. It's just scrapped.
Absolutely. And what I will say is, a lot of our shorter officers are probably a lot of our best officers.
And Brian, what about the graduates issue?
The police promotion system is very complex, and individuals that put themselves into the police promotion will be challenged. They have a number of markers to get through. They have a number of exams to do. All I can say is it's a process which is open to everyone. It's very challenging, and sometimes it does produce good leaders and sometimes it doesn't. But that's like in any occupation that we have. We have sometimes poor managers or good managers wherever we work.
Sully has texted in to say the Army also has no height restriction and they don't look weak. We're going to continue taking your calls at 0345 6060 973 and your texts at 84850 for Tiffany Lynch and Brian Booth of the Police Federation. And after the news, a former elected police and crime commissioner has called into LBC this evening. We will get his question next. The time now is 8:30. The news headlines from Daryl Jackson.
Police chiefs say they won't become complacent after another night of disorder failed to materialise. The National Police Chiefs Council described counter-protests as a turning point in the recent violence seen in England. US TV network ABC says both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have agreed to a presidential debate next month. Earlier, Mr. Trump told a news conference he'd proposed 3 debates with 3 television networks. And Team GB have a 13th gold of the Paris Olympics thanks to kite surfer Ellie Aldridge. Her victory added a 2nd sailing medal of the Games. LBC weather: showers continuing in the north and west tonight, will clear for most by dawn. The odd shower in the southeast and a low of 10 degrees.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation with Simon Marks. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
And in the midst of some pretty tumultuous times over the last few days on the streets of England and Northern Ireland, we are taking your calls in this hour for Tiffany Lynch, the Acting National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales, and Brian Booth, the Acting Deputy National Chair of the Police Federation. You can ask questions via WhatsApp or by simply calling in and asking the questions on the phone at 0345 6060 973. And of course, you can text us at 84850. And I told you before the break that we have on the line a former elected police crime commissioner with a question. It's Festus Akinbusoye, who is the former elected police crime commissioner for Bedfordshire. Festus, thanks very much for calling in. What would you like to ask or say to Tiffany and Brian?
Hi, Tiffany and Brian. Just wanted to ask your views on the current pay awards that was made for police officers. I believe this year they've just been awarded about 4 to 4.5%, and that money, some of that money, has got to come from existing budgets, which will mean that chief constables and police and crime commissioners will have to make some very difficult choices potentially, meaning they may have to make some cuts to possibly police staff. Whereas last year they got about 7.5% and new money for that. What are you doing to try and ensure that there's a better pay award for police officers, given the very, very strained work environment that those officers are having to work in at the moment?
Festus, thank you so much for raising this issue, and it is really on our radar and important to our members. You're quite right. They have received one of the lowest pay awards in the public sector, which is very disappointing from our frontline colleagues, especially when we see the danger that they've been placed in over this last week. When you talk about also the police budgets, you know, we've been asking for a long time for a Royal Commission to look at the full demographics of policing and how money is apportioned through the country. When we're talking about police officer pay, I really hope once this, shall we say, uprising calms down, we will be able to meet with government ministers after the recess and start talking about proper paying conditions with this new government.
Tiffany?
Yeah, and good evening, Festus. Lovely to hear from you again.
Yes.
Policing holds a very, very unique place in society and the role that police officers do. And we're seeing that this week. And in terms of the pay award, is it enough? Absolutely it isn't. We need government to acknowledge, accept and reflect that policing shouldn't be the forgotten service. What we will be doing, as Brian said, we will be working and engaging with government to demonstrate how important that reflection and that acceptance of the policing role is needed. And it needs new money. It needs money to come from somewhere, and it doesn't and shouldn't come from existing police budgets, because, as Festus, you quite rightly say, it does mean that chief constables essentially are getting hand-strapped and having to make cuts elsewhere, and normally it's people. And we need the police staff. It's normally police staff that get affected, or police buildings,
right.
or police
Exactly.
buildings. Because obviously with police officers, we need the police officers on the street.
Festus, what are your thoughts following up on that?
I can only wish them luck. And this is not a party political thing. It's been an ongoing issue for chiefs and PCCs with successive governments. We have to decide once and for all where we place policing in the order of priority in this country. They are the ones, in my opinion, who literally stand between anarchy on our streets and some kind of civility. And I think a 4.5% pay award is derisory, in my opinion, when others are getting 22%. Fair play to the junior doctors. Well done to them for getting that. But I just don't think, in line with what we've seen at the moment, and the issue of recruitment and retention, of 4.5% pay award with possible difficult budgetary issues in the future coming up, is the right way forward. We cannot continue like this. It's not right.
Festus, I think your term as a police crime commissioner ended in May. What were you being told by the Home Office before your term expired?
What we're being told was, this was all kind of also around the funding formula, which Brian mentioned. Very sadly, that never happened, and it's been going on for far too long. And the implications of this funding formula is also playing out today with this riot in terms of resourcing across the country. But in terms of the pay award, the recommendations had not come out by the time the election was called, as far as I'm aware. But either way, I just think this 4.5% is just not satisfactory, given the pressures that police chiefs and PCCs are facing at the moment and the pressures that police officers and police staff are having to deal with up and down left and right of this country. The pressures is enormous, and this is just not good enough, and it's only going to create more problems for policing if we don't deal with it now.
Can't disagree with what Festus has said. What the Police Federation are also seeking is for a change in how the pay awards are determined. So it's the pay mechanism. Previously, historically, we had the Police Negotiating Board, where the Police Federation and the other staff associations and the National Police Chiefs Council, all of key stakeholders would have a seat at a table where we would be able to discuss and negotiate all of the terms and conditions that police officers have to work under. That was scrapped, and we were given the Police Remuneration Review Body, and the Police Federation have pulled away from that engagement because we don't see it as independent, we don't see it as fair, and the value of policing is not being demonstrated in what's coming out with these pay awards.
You just referred to it in that conversation with Festus, and Festus Akinbusoye, thank you very much for calling in tonight. You referred to the police as the forgotten force, and we've had a text in from a serving prison officer who says, "I don't envy the brave police officers on our streets. The level of criticism they receive is absolutely unbelievable when you consider the life-saving work they do for an unappreciating public. I wholeheartedly believe that I receive more respect from my prisoners than the police receive from the public, and it's disgusting." Is that a widely held view within the force? Are you, on a regular basis, do you feel that your members are underappreciated by members of the public, Brian?
I feel it can be like that because when you look at the social media and how the public engage with police officers or make comments about police officers, I can imagine a lot of police officers thinking, I feel hard done by. And when you look at our pay and morale survey that we did last year, the morale of officers is at an all-time low, and it's been decreasing over the last 5 years. And if we go back to where we talk about the retention, issue within policing, in the last year alone, we've lost 5,000 officers who've left the service mid-service, which is absolutely off the charts, unprecedented numbers.
So there's an associated question, I think, that we can take now on the phones, and it comes from Jeff in Croydon. Jeff, thanks for calling in. What would you like to ask?
Hi, good evening to you all. When I was born back in 1963, through the 60s and 70s, we had a local bobby, and his name was Bob, believe it or not. And lovely guy. I'm 61 this year, and I can still see him now. And he used to walk our streets within a 3-mile radius. He would be knocking on doors. He would come into our house and have a ham sandwich with my mum and dad. Yeah. He'd even pick me up on the street and give me a slap round the back of the head because I was driving a car that didn't have an engine. And we were pushing it up and down the alleyway, and they were good old days. But the whole point was he knew everyone in our streets, and he would knock on doors and everyone knew him, and I could approach him at any point, just like my dad. I could just walk up to him and say, "Hey, Bob, I'm having a bit of trouble at school." That's all gone now, and I think that needs to return. When you've got someone like that you can see that's walking up and down your streets, that's absolutely brilliant. And now we see nothing in that area now. Gypsy Hill Police Station, closed, gone. Norbury Police Station, closed, gone. You don't see police on the streets no more, and they don't have that personal contact with families like they did in the old days. And I think that needs to be brought back. I really do.
What has happened, Jeff is effectively asking, to Dixon of Dock Green?
A lot. And I can relate to what Jeff is saying, because I have to thank my local village Bobby, PC Derek Shearing, rest in peace, for me joining the police service. He was our local youth club leader. We all admired him, respected him, but we were also really scared of him, because we knew that if he was coming knocking at the door, it wasn't a social visit. He was coming to whatever mischief we've been getting up to in the village. So neighbourhood policing is the bedrock of policing. When you have a local officer that is on the beat and is there not just for a matter of weeks or a matter of months, that gets to know the community, that gets to know the criminals that are part of that community, whether they're working outside of the area or inside, then we can actually get to the bottom of what's going on a lot quicker. What we're finding now is we've lost neighbourhood policing. It's coming back. And our officers don't know our criminals. So when it comes to the investigation, it's taking a lot longer. And we need that community. It's all about community engagement. When you have a police officer there that is approachable and gets to know people, they get to know a lot more information as well.
It's also got to be, Brian, about recruitment as well. I mean, the reason you don't see many police officers walking the streets of your neighbourhood, wherever that neighbourhood happens to be, is presumably because there aren't enough of them to deploy in that fashion.
Correct. As I said earlier, the policing style of this country has changed dramatically. You know, there were lovely days. You know, I grew up on a council estate in Huddersfield, and I lived next to a boy called Mick Semenchuk. And you're absolutely right, it was a pillar of the community and actually inspired me to be a police officer. But you're right, that's probably a bygone day, because demand is different now. And sometimes police officers can be seen as aloof because they're driving by, but they're driving by because they have greater areas to cover, because more officers have been taken off the street to deal with the issues that we're raising at government level around paperwork and bureaucracy.
More of your calls for Tiffany Lynch and Brian Booth of the Police Federation between now and the top of the hour. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text us at 84850. It is almost 14 minutes to 9.
LBC this morning on Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
If you are Muslim, Asian, mixed race, black, do you feel safer, more relaxed today than you did exactly 24 hours ago? Kelly in Greenford.
Found myself really changing my behaviour.
Do you feel uneasy today?
Every day I get in the car and I brace myself for what's happened the night before, and it's really good to hear that not much happened.
Raj is in Chigwell.
Seeing all the faiths come together and seeing lots of British Caucasian people standing with her in the anti-protest was really humbling to see. Still, as a nation, we have a long way to go.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7.
With Vauxhall, the new electric van range designed to energise Britain.
LBC. Simon Marks on LBC. Text 84850.
Back to our calls for Tiffany Lynch and Brian Booth of the Police Federation, and our next call comes from Mick in Leicester. Mick, how are you tonight?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very good. What would you like to ask?
Wonderful. Yeah, so my question is in relation to the 2022 riots in Leicester, where we saw the police stand back and watch as crowds desecrated a Hindu temple. They also chanted grossly anti-Hindu rhetoric and burned religious symbols. And we saw no real appetite from the police to deal with the crowds. To be quite blunt, within the Hindu community, this is thought to be due to the fact that the protesters were largely Muslim. In contrast, when we fast forward to Southport, police seem to be incredibly keen to ensure that no damage was done to the mosque, even going as far as to form a human shield to ensure its protection. In the minds of many Hindus, especially in Leicester, we do see this as a sign of two-tier policing. So why was there such a difference in response?
Tiffany Lynch, you are not just the Acting National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales, you are a serving officer in the Leicestershire Force.
I am indeed, and good evening to you.
Good evening.
In relation to specific incidents, I can't obviously comment on the instruction and the tactics that were taken for what happened in Leicester back in 2022. And it's totally understandable how you would feel if the policing service or the service that's being given to you appears to be that one-sided. But I go back to what I said earlier on. It will depend on the intelligence, the community relations, the community tensions, and the risk, threat, harm and risk at that time for whether the police engage and move forward or whether they hold back and try and deal with things in a different way.
But Mick, I'm going to assume that you don't feel either persuaded by that or that was adequately explained at the time, or maybe you take a different view.
Not really. I mean, we then saw that these riots extended in Birmingham as well, where, yes, another Hindu temple was attacked, once again by a largely Islamic crowd. And in the same way, police just stood back and did nothing. In terms of community tensions and risks at the time, I'm not too sure whether you're too familiar with kind of the auspicious dates in Hinduism, but that was throughout our Diwali and Navratri period that was happening, where a lot of Hindus, especially elderly Hindus, were out on the streets, walking to temples, walking to functions, and feeling incredibly unsafe by what was effectively mobs of people from other areas of Leicester and even bussed in Islamic communities into Leicester, attacking them. And we had instances within our own community where we know alcohol was thrown at old women. We know meat was thrown at people. We saw the desecration of temples. We saw graffitiing on homes. We saw the break-in on homes. We saw public burnings of Hindu kind of religious symbols. The whole thing felt very one-sided, and then we come to 2024, where it seems as though Muslims are facing a similar sort of attack, and the police are very quick to respond. We also had it in Leicester, where Peter Soulsby, after the riots took place, met with Majid Freeman, a man that's now being charged with terrorism, to say that we've had a very good and active discussion about what happened with the riots in Leicester, and it all felt as though only that side of the community was being heard, and the Hindu community was just once again two-tiered and chucked to the side and told to deal with it.
Tiffany?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing here is where our police leaders need to come out and explain why we do what we do when we do it. Because I think once we give the communities the information and that explanation and have that community engagement, and it might not be able to be done right at the very time, but everybody needs to have that understanding. And the police service is continually learning. And it was only 2022, granted, only 2 years ago. But a lot has happened, and the police service is learning a lot as we move forward. And I think what you're going to see, and what you have seen, is that demonstration that violent disorder, irrespective of who, will be dealt with robustly. Because we cannot go back to what we've experienced this last week.
Mick in Leicester, thank you for that call. We've got a text from Alex in Holmfirth West in Yorkshire, I think for Brian. He says, we hear a lot about the increased bureaucracy in modern police work. Can you explain exactly what police are being asked to do now that they weren't in the past? Surely it's not entirely pointless work.
Alex, it's a really good question. So, major incidents or, crimes that get committed, police officers have to do a lot of redacting, so, for example, CCTV is everywhere. It's on us buses. You can have up to 16 CCTV cameras on buses. On trains, we have ring doorbells everywhere. We've got people with dash cams. We've got mobile phones we seize from offenders. All this needs to be reviewed when you're compiling a case under the Data Protection Act, so we can actually provide information to the defence team to see what unused materials we have used in an investigation or not used. This takes time. Officers have to sit for hours and hours looking through the footage and deciding whether it's relevant evidence or not relevant evidence to the case. What we're trying to do is minimise how much reviewing they have to do of all this unused footage and mean that we can have a more slimline process when officers submit files to the Crown Prosecution Service.
Tiffany, a question from Isaac on WhatsApp. Does the Police Federation have a recourse to challenge a judge's decision in situations where an officer is unjustly found guilty after being attacked?
Sorry, can you repeat that one?
Does the Police Federation have recourse to challenge a judge's decision if an officer is unjustly convicted after being attacked? Is there an appeals process?
There is an appeals.
Presumably
there is a criminal appeals process in terms of our police regulations. So we actually have two bars. So we have the criminal bar and then we have the police regulations bar. So from a criminal aspect, there's the appeals process through law, and then should the officer be convicted for an offence, they will then go through the police conduct process, of which there is also an appeals process.
OK, next call is from Darren in Streatham. Darren, you are on the air. What would you like to ask Tiffany and Brian?
OK, I'd like to make a suggestion, actually, to Tiffany and Brian. And what the suggestion is, right, is that I personally believe that there's a lot of rhetoric and talk about what's happened, but I just want to give a suggestion, and the suggestion goes like this. When I was quite young, I took part in what was called the Metropolitan Police Disco Dancing Competition, and you also had the Metropolitan Police Football Competition, five-a-side competition. Now, let me tell you a little bit about that competition. It created so much cohesion and so much engagement. Now, I ended up being a judge for this actual competition, and the amount of stick that I actually got, because there is this unsaid rule about you do not engage with the police. If you're seen to be engaging with the police, you're seen as a grass and a snitch and all this kind of stuff. Now, this is where the divide has really happened. So I think the police have really got to make a massive effort to create engagement, to create cohesion. And that which happened in that, well, it was 1983, 82 to about 1986 was a real winner. Keep in mind, right now, 2024, you've got the first time that breakdancing is going to be in the Olympics. Yeah. And I would say that the first time that ever breaking was in a competition, it was actually, people don't even know, this was 1983, and it was by the Police Federation.
OK, Darren, thank you for the call. There is an issue, though, here, isn't there? Because these kind of flash mob dances and things go viral on social media sometimes, and the police sometimes get accused of wasting their time and being engaged in pointless interaction with members of the public. Darren is suggesting that's good for building community relationships.
I think Darren's absolutely right. I think, and well done, Darren, for doing that, because it takes a person with great calibre to actually step up in the community and make a difference, and you've obviously done that. When we look at policing at the moment, we're so under the cost through demand. It would take significant investment to do this on a wide scale, but I absolutely agree with you. It's something we need to do, and I would encourage you to go speak to your local MP and give your views, because I think it's an excellent idea.
Tiffany, you on board with that?
Absolutely, wholeheartedly agree. Again, another personal story. I learnt to box, and I boxed out of a very spit and sawdust gym, and I think it took 6 months for anyone to actually talk to me because they knew that I was a police officer. But I kept going and I kept going and I kept going. Not just because I loved the boxing, but I loved the atmosphere. I wanted to be part of it with them. And once we actually started breaking down those barriers, they had an understanding of me and the service and my role, and I had an understanding of them. And it was great. There needs to be more of it.
I am hugely grateful to both of you for being here tonight. Tiffany Lynch, the Acting National Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales, and Brian Booth, the Acting Deputy National Chair. Thanks for taking everybody's calls and questions, and I hope you'll come back and see us again. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. So into my final hour tonight, and we're going to ask what happens if Donald Trump wins America's election in November. Will Keir Starmer's government be able to work with him? Earlier today, I spoke to one of the former president's top advisors on foreign affairs.
I wouldn't call it far-right thuggery. I think it's just people who break the law.
Ambassador Rick Grinnell is tipped for a major post in a second Trump administration. He thinks the far left in the UK is trying to cancel the far right, and he thinks America's partners and allies need to pay more to cover the costs of providing them with a US security and defence umbrella. Do you think Labour can find common cause with Trump and with people like him?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. Despite police describing last night as a turning point, a government minister says extra police will continue to be on standby. More than 480 people have now been arrested after several dawn raids were carried out across the country. The National Police Chiefs Council says forces will not become complacent. Communities Minister Alex Norris, speaking on LBC, wouldn't rule out the threat of the unrest lasting for weeks.